And good morning, everybody. My name is Nicholas Whitaker. I'm the Media Outreach Manager at the News Lab at Google. This is our second in a series of 6 AMP office hours. We have special guests today, Emeric Studer, who's going to be giving us a deep presentation on AMP. This is, as I mentioned, the second in a series of 6. So each series, or each episode, we're going to be getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the technical aspects of AMP. Stacy Chan is joining us also from the search team, and she's going to be giving us a little bit of a breakdown of what the rest of the agenda will be for the rest of the 4 or 5 episodes we have left. At the beginning here, I just want to give you a quick introduction about the News Lab. You can find more information about the News Lab at g.co/newslab. And at the top of that website, you're going to find all of the social media links. Our YouTube page is where all of these office hours are going to be hosted after the event. We are taking questions from people watching live, and then also taking questions from the previous weeks. So if you have a question that you'd like us to answer during these office hours, definitely take advantage of the experts that we have in the room. You can leave your comments in the comment section below any of the office hour videos on Google Plus or on our YouTube page. Stacy, would you like to introduce the rest of our guests that we're going to have today?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. As Nick was saying, we're really excited to host these Hangouts on air because not only is it a chance for all of you to hear about AMP, but you can always join these Hangouts live with the various presenters we have lined up all the way up until AMP launches. So every Friday, we promise to bring you a speaker to discuss various components of AMP, such as ads, analytics, format innovation, or paywalls. But today, following Richard Gingras' great introduction of AMP last week, he's the head of news at Google. Today, we are so lucky to have Emeric Studer, who's a technology manager at Google, and he is an expert on all things AMP. So ask your questions in the G Plus event page. If you're having trouble finding it and you're just joining in, you can head to plus.google.com/plus the symbol Google News Lab, and you should be able to find the event right away.
And we've also shared that link on Twitter as well, so at Google News Lab. If you just want something really short to follow, you can find the links to this Hangout as well as previous Hangouts on our Twitter page as well.
Emeric, I think that's a cue for you.
Thank you, Stacy. So hello, everyone. My name is Emeric, and I'm a technology manager at Google. So let me just share my screen. Here we are. So today we're going to talk about AMP and going a bit more deeper into the technology. But first, I want to explain a bit more why we are doing AMP, what is AMP, and then how it works. So as you know, more and more users are using mobile to browse the web. So at Google, for the moment, it's more than 50% of the users that are using mobile devices for searching about what they like. But the problem is, if the website is too slow to load, it can go up to 40% of the people that stop opening the page and will just quit. So there is quite some challenges with the web. So if you're using an old phone, for example, it could be quite slow. If you don't have 3G, 4G, LTE, also it might take longer to load the page, and then people will drop. There is quite some problems with the ads. Monetization is not as good as on desktop, and it's difficult for the developer to keep pace in terms of the technology. It's moving so fast and so quickly, and it's kind of difficult to make sure that your site is always up to date. To improve a bit that, more and more users are now using ad blockers, and that's a challenge to the industry because ad blockers means less ads, but it's a huge problem for publishers because they have no more revenues. And we want to continue to have good content on the web, meaning better ad system. So for that, we thought about something that should be fast, or to make it the mobile web way faster. We wanted it to be easy to implement. We don't want developers to learn new technologies, basically. To make sure that it's loading fast as well, we want to be able to validate the content, making sure that the source code is working. To spread this technology around, we want it to be open. So anyone can come, read the source code, help implementing. So just going to the GitHub opening issues, working on the code, submitting code, and so on. And for the publishers to use it, well, we wanted to have some incentives. So we believe that AMP is faster, meaning that people will browse and consume more things on the web, and eventually see more ads, meaning more revenues for the publishers. So in terms of technical details, you can do mobile web quite fast if you have developers that know what they're doing. So to do that, they have to optimize the code. They have to optimize the JavaScript. They have to optimize the bandwidth used to have multiple versions of the images depending on the mobile phone or the device that you're sending those data to. You can also use some content delivery network and other things like that. But it's quite complicated to have something perfect. So AMP is a way to providing all those things for a reduced cost. So it's making sure that there is less JavaScript, that everyone is using the same code that is hosted on a content delivery network on a cache. It's optimizing the bandwidth to make sure that you're getting the best content for your device, that everything you're downloading, like an image or an ad or the content itself, is loading in parallel and not one after the other. And this really makes it faster. Also, there is a local copy of your page if you have AMP. So AMP is using standard technologies, so HTML5, and a Redis subset actually of HTML5 that we will call AMP HTML. JavaScript, standard JavaScript, AMP.js, you don't have to do anything. You just have to include the AMP.js in your header, and you will enjoy all those code. And you can customize for sure those AMP because it's your website, right? It's your content. So you want it to look like your own. For that, you're using CSS3 as usual, but there is like a limitation in terms of quantity of code you can write because you want to make sure that you're only using what you need. And you also have something for free, which is a caching. So what is a caching? Well, if you're not using any cache or any content delivery network, usually your web server is delivering the page directly to the user. So imagine your server is based in the US and you have a user in Russia or in Australia. They will all contact your server in the US to get the content. So the time it passed through the ocean, and it's a waste of time for you, right? It's slower for the user. So a way to fix that is to have a content delivery network, or in this case, what we call AMP cache. It's servers that are close to your users that will host a local copy of your page. It's still your page. You will be able to manage the fact that you want to update this page and so on, but it's next to the user and much, much faster for them. So how AMP is working? So the workflow is you as a publisher, you're creating your page, and you create a new copy of this page. So you have your standard HTML page, what we call the canonical page, the origin, and you create a new version. Maybe you already have a new version, like a mobile version of the page. You create an AMP HTML version. So you reference this one in your standard page and say, hey, I have an optimized page AMP. The different cache will crawl this AMP page and store it. And then you've got people like Pinterest, Twitter, Google that will be able to directly serve your page to the users. The good thing is that analytics information and ad revenue are coming back directly to you. So there is no split in terms of those things. Nobody knows about the statistics but you. Nobody gets your money. In terms of features, the AMP is prioritizing the content, making sure that what we serve first is what the user will see. So basically the first part of the page, things that you'll see when you're opening the page. So it's prefetching the elements, making sure that when the user is clicking on the link, he already has everything he needs. There is no relayout, meaning that you won't have this flickering effect, the fact that there is an ad that is appearing and you don't know where you are in your page anymore and you have to re-scroll in your page. We make sure that this will not happen. And I explain a bit more in details later how we do that. There is asynchronous load. On the right of the page, you have an example of a graphic of what it represents. So if you're adding some JavaScript or so image in your page, it's loading one after the other, and the entire load page is longer. What you can do is to force them to load asynchronously, so in parallel, and it reduces the time it takes to load the page. The entire AMP is responsive, meaning that if you're using a tablet or a cell phone, the content will look nice on all the devices. It also get like the best version of the image for your screen because it's supporting what you call source set support for the image. Meaning that if you have a very nice device with high resolution, you can get a better quality of the image because you will see the difference. But if you have an old phone with a resolution that is not that good, maybe you don't need to download like this very, very nice quality image. We are limiting a bit by design what you can do with AMP. As I said, it's a limited version of HTML. There is no scrolling element allowed in the page. There is no custom JavaScript except if you're using an iframe, an AMP iframe, and I'll explain that later. And in terms of templating CSS, we're limiting the size per page to 50 kilobytes. It's more than enough to have a wonderful page, but it's not enough to have like a full website application. So about the way we are downloading resources. So first, AMP will download the viewport things. So meaning the content is a viewport, if there is an image, a logo, and all those things. So again, if the user is clicking on your link, that's what you see first, and you want this to be available. So the user will directly have the content, will be extremely fast. So you can have a look at the demo, it's online, and you'll see how responsive this is and how fast it is. Then, if the user is scrolling, he will see the rest of the content. Those content will have lower priority in terms of loading. So images and iframe and then ads will load a bit later, but normally, sorry, light went off in my room. But ads will normally load way faster than the demo you have because it's important as well for you. So to do that, we ask the developers for each element in the page to predefine the size of the element. Because the time it takes to load, remember it's asynchronous, we need to know exactly what will be the size of the element so there is no relayout after that. So for example, in this example here, you'll see that there is a rectangle, which is gray, and eventually there is an ad coming at this place. Normally, AMP is fast enough, so user will never see that, but that's technically how it works. And that's why for every AMP element, you have to specify dimensions, and that's very important. So let's go in the code and let's have a look at the simpler AMP document you can do. So it looks exactly like HTML because it's HTML. The only difference you can see is this spark after HTML. It means that this is an AMP page, and crawlers will look for this and understand that this is an AMP page that normally should be optimized and validatable. In this page, you can see we're using UTF-8 because we want to be able to do web page for the entire world. So we recommend using UTF-8. We are saying which one is a canonical page, meaning your reference page, your website version of the page, let's say, and a viewport, a bit of styling. I can explain that a bit later why, and we're loading the AMP JavaScript that is hosted on the Content Delivery Network. Then you have your body as usual, and in your body you can add some extra components. For example, ads. It's usually quite complicated to do ads because each ads provider has his own JavaScript or his own way of implementing the ad. It's the same tag, and there is just a few parameters in this component to say, hey, that's my account ID, that's my campaign, and that's the size of my ad. And that's very important, again, to specify the size. And as you can see here, there is AdSense, DoubleClick, A9, Ad Reactor. They all look very similar, so for developer, it's very easy to add ads and all the type of things in the page. And every day we've got new ads supported, so have a look at the GitHub to have the full list of components. If you don't have the component you need, you can always use iframes. The only important things to note here is that iframes will be also loaded asynchronously, meaning everything that the iframe is loading will be loaded asynchronously. Oops, sorry about that. In the iframe itself, you can add parameters, allow same origin, for example, allow pop-ups. Allow pop-ups with sandboxes, meaning that people will be able to follow the link, and so on and so on. It could be responsive, and you specify the source as your iframe, like a standard iframe. So if we look at what it looks in reality, an AMP page will be more something like that. So some custom styling inline in your code, 50K max, and in your body some other components, like here an image, some add, and so on and so on. But how do you know that your page is a valid AMP page? Well, first have a look at the documentation, and then for your page, just add dash development equal to 1 to the URL, and you will have a nice debugger interface if you're using the DevTool console, explaining that, hey, that's a valid document, or there's a few things you need to fix. So have a look. If you need more information, just go to the home page of the project, and you will have all the information you need. Also, you can validate your metadata. We're asking you to add some metadata in your page because we want to know more about your page. We want to know maybe who is the owner when you publish this page. What type of article is it? So in this example, it's a news article. For that, you can use our structured data testing tool. So in this example, you can't really see, but there is a date modified that is missing that we recommend to use, not mandatory, but it would be better. So have a look at this tool. It's very nice. If you want to be part of the launch, we are asking you to use metadata. So always better to do. And something brand new is that the Google Search Console now has an accelerated mobile pages specific graph showing the number of pages we indexed on your domain and the errors also in your page. So you can dig in, you can click on the type of error. You'll see a list of pages, and for each page you'll see the different problems. Could be metadata problems, something missing or not allowed, some attributes that are not allowed, some AMP thing that is not perfect. Have a look. It's already available, and it's a great way to debug your page. So please join the initiative. Go to ampproject.org. You have great documentation here, step-by-step information on how to start to do your own AMP page. You can follow up on GitHub. That's the source code of the project. You can add issues. You can add code. It's a community that is responsive. It's going to be, just join is nice. If you have specific problems about your development that you can't do anything, just go in Stack Overflow, ask questions. There's a lot of people that be happy to help you on this, and just start doing it. Just test. It's easy. It's an HTML page at the end, and launch. Thank you.
That's beautiful, Emeric. Thank you so much. And I think the main point here at the end too is that there's a lot of resources that are available online. So if people are interested in finding more information about AMP, if they have additional questions, or as Emeric said, if you just want to get started to get playing around with these new options, we have documentation and we have resources available for you, and there's a very active community around this right now. We have a few questions that have been coming in via the comment section, both on our Google Plus page and then also the event page itself. And then I've got a few questions from the last office hour that we can also follow up with as well. Emeric, feel free to chip away at some of these if you like, and otherwise we can direct people to the right resources to find more information on this. The first one that I'm just going to address here is from Martin Panayotov. I probably pronounced his last name wrong. I apologize, Martin. He had a question specifically about an instance that he has AMP versions of his own blog posts. And he said that he's concerned about links within AMP pages. Should they point to other AMP pages or to the standard blog post pages? And he's got a few other questions that are kind of related to that. Emeric, what's the best practices around that right now, or where can people find information about that?
So, well, you can do both. You can redirect to your canonical page, so your home page, your version of the page, the main version of the page, or you can redirect to AMP. It really depends what you want for your users. Maybe you want them to stay in this AMP environment to have fast loading pages, but maybe also you have more things in your website, like tracking is a bit different, or you want to start some cookies and so on. So it really depends on what you want to achieve with your users, and you can do both. So that's really up to you.
And I think it would also matter quite a bit to who your audience is. So if you're looking at your analytics, you see a large portion of your audience is coming in on mobile devices. Perhaps you are aware that you're in a low bandwidth environment. It would probably make more sense to point to AMP versus say to canonical pages. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I think it's on a very much a case-by-case basis. But as time goes on, as more information comes out about how people are implementing these and how they're being successful, obviously the community will help fill in some of those questions as well. Chris Andrews asked, he says, it seems like we would need the links to go to regular pages since the same article content would be used in both places, but a link to the regular page should be forwarded to the AMP page indicated on the regular pages with like a rel equals AMP HTML link. Is that like an appropriate kind of redirect? And then he's got a follow-up question to that.
So it's a bit the same. It really depends your audience, and you can send directly users to the AMP page if you know they are on mobile devices, and that's totally great. It's going to be hosted on your website. So if your website is supporting that, feel free to do it. If not, just you can also send them to Canonical page. So look at your audience, as Nicholas mentioned, and do the best for your interest.
We got another one. And this is actually another one for Chris Andrews. Chris, thank you for your questions today. He says, a question that has already been asked on Google News Publisher Forum, but might be good to pull in here. He says something with like Google Charts. Is there a way to add a chart by using AMP iframe, or does there have to be a specific support for Google Charts before they can be included on an AMP page? And I would actually just add to this question as well, kind of expand that out to other types of iframe embeds. So any kind of data visualization, a map embed, and so on.
So you can definitely do that in an iframe if you want. You just need to make sure that this is hosted on HTTPS server, so using SSL encryptions, SSL-TLS. I don't know about any elements to do that for the moment, but just go in the GitHub and open an issue. Ask to have this feature.
That's great. And just to remind folks.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to hop into, because the site addresses this specifically as well. They're asking how do we include iframes in various media elements. So on ampproject.org, we specifically talk about images, animated images, videos, and audio resources. So that doesn't quite cover maybe the charts that Chris was talking about. But as Emeric said, you mentioned on the GitHub page, because this AMP project is open source, rally as many publishers as you can around this idea that we need iframes for charts, and let's make that happen.
That's great. Thanks, Stacy. This is a related question, and I think Martin and Chris are kind of talking a little bit about this issue that we were talking about with the redirects to the AMP pages. I just wanted to verify Martin's thoughts here. He says, the thing is that we don't know if the browser will automatically forward users from the regular page to the AMP version once an internal link is visited. This would require all major mobile browsers to support natively this kind of redirect. Other than Chrome, obviously, are there other is there support natively in other browsers so that this kind of a thing would not be as much of an issue? Or maybe you could speak to that.
So AMP is supported by all the main browsers. So we make sure that it's supported by at least the latest 2 release of all the browsers, mobile browsers, desktop browsers, and so on and so on. So that should not be a problem. About the redirect, there is no feature to automatically redirect the users to the AMP version of the page. So you can do it by forcing the redirect if you want, but that's, again, it's really up to you and your business. But we won't force users to go in an AMP page because maybe it's not what you want.
That's great. Thiago Gonzalez asks, he says, so, and this is a question that's come up in the past, and I think this is a bit of a workflow question, but also might tie to a bit around analytics, which is a session that we're going to cover later on in the series, but Emeric, if you have some thoughts around this. He says, so to use AMP, we need to duplicate all of our pages, the normal one and the AMP one. We have a lot of metrics in our normal page, like ComScore, Chartbeat, Analytics, etc., for example, and he gives a URL link. How do you deal with kind of like the split of attention with analytics and kind of measuring tools like Chartbeat and ComScore?
So as you said, we'll have a session about analytics soon. You can already go in the GitHub and have a look. We'll support most of the analytics platforms, so you'll be able to add those analytics to your page. So yes, keep your 2 versions of the page, and make sure to add analytics, the same analytics on both versions. So normally you should be able to solve that problem by just looking at the existing components and adding those components.
That's great. One other question. This is Jeannie Hill, thanks for your question. She says, do you recommend creating AMP pages in raw HTML versus the AMP-WP plugin? She says she has several WordPress client sites. To avoid the weight of a plugin, what happens if she simply adds that little piece of script within a body tag?
So I guess the question is, do we enable AMP on WordPress?
Yeah, I think that's probably a shorter way of doing it, or shorter way of asking it.
Yeah, so you can either, if you're using a standard CMS like WordPress, enable AMP on your standard CMS. I would encourage you to do that because it will come for free, so you won't have to implement it by your own. If you have the resources to do AMP and create this version of the page, AMP HTML version of the page, you're also free to do it by yourself. But it's going to be more work than just enabling it in your CMS if your CMS is supporting it.
That's great. And she's got a follow-up question there. She says, if there's an error somewhere in the structured data, how does that impact results? As it is evolving so fast, one day I have no errors and then they show up. Is that because it's evolving, or does it just take that long to propagate?
Well, you can validate first your schema, and schema is not changing that much, so it should not appear later. Because that's just metadata. If there is an error in your metadata, it really depends what type of error it is. If it's an error in type of the article, let's say you're saying it's a blog post and it's not a blog post, it might affect your page for sure. But if it's just some warning, something is missing, I don't know, maybe like the author, it should not be a big issue.
And to tag onto the WordPress issue, I think it's a very big concern from publishers around the industry, because publishers, big and small, are hosting their content through WordPress's great CMS. And we are actively collaborating with WordPress. They're trying to install probably a plugin or something similar where you can actually just convert most of your canonical files to AMP HTML files. In the meantime, what would help is to talk to your WordPress contact and say, hey, when is this going to be developed? Because we really want to create AMP HTML files as soon as possible, potentially in time for launch.
Very good. Thanks, Stacy. Let's see. Another question. This one is from Seth Holliday. Actually, we got two back-to-back questions from Seth. So thank you, Seth, for your questions. He says, is the content served to search users hosted on the publisher's website or by Google? When testing AMP pages and using browser sharing tools, the shared URL is the Google search result page. Can you just clarify that?
So what happens is that you have your version of the page that is hosted by you, and the cache will get a copied version of this page. So you will have two versions. If you're coming from Google, for example, Google will redirect the user to the cache because it will be faster. But if you link into your own AMP page, maybe it's going to come from your own website. Is it clear enough, or?
I think so. His last question just disappeared. So I'm going to turn to some of the other questions, unless we have a couple questions from somebody in the actual audience. Emeric, you're having a heck of a time with your light there today.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. Got a question from William Alvarez. And this is kind of more like a nuts and bolts question, but and this maybe actually ties also into analytics later on. But he's asking, what's the best way to count clicks from this type of source from an AMP page versus, say, a regular page?
Well, either you use AMP Analytics, or you have also another component we didn't talk about, is AMP Pixel. So it's like a pixel image that you have already to track, and it's working as well. So you can, as you're doing right now, it depends on what you want, but there is a multiple way of doing it. Pixels, Analytics, just have a look at the documentation and pick the one that will work for you.
That's great. And Seth, if you're still watching the Hangout, please re-ask your last question, because your question got lost in the shuffle there. But I would like to follow up on that one because it looked like a good one. In the meantime, we got another one from Thiago Gonzalez. He says, or actually, I'm sorry, we already answered that one. I'll turn to the older questions. One moment. I'll find a good one here. So this is a bit of a question as far as like finding information. We mentioned the GitHub page a couple times. We mentioned the ampproject.org site. One of the questions that keeps coming up is like, will information be cross-referenced with the News Publisher Center? He says, will any information or options related to AMP-powered pages be available within that News Publisher Center? Where's the best place for people to continue to find information?
Well, if you want to be on the edge, GitHub is like where you should be. If you want to participate in the project, add issues, discuss about all the developers, just go into GitHub. If you want to have like a more mature documentation, go in ampproject.org. There is stable documentation about it, and normally you will find what you need. From ampproject.org, it's going to redirect to different places. So if you don't exactly, just go there and start there.
That's great. Vincent Velma asks, he says, is the presentation available? It'd be easy to copy some of the graphics in his own deck for promoting AMP.
Well, for the moment it's not, but I'll see what we can do.
That's great. Andy Wilson asked a couple days ago, and this is a little bit more of a specific question, but she or he asked, would you please elaborate on the requirements that AMP iframe elements appear at least 600 pixels from the top of the page or not within the first 75% of the view part? In particular, what is the reason for this type of restriction?
So, well, there is a full thread, I think, on GitHub about it. We don't know exactly how long it's going to take for the iframe to load, right? So since we're loading it asynchronously, we prefer it not to be on the viewport, or not at least at the top, what people will view first. So that's the main reason for not being at the top of the page, and that probably answers you to question why the 600 pixel and 75% of the viewports. It's just to make sure that people will see the page as quickly as possible.
That's great. So it's really an issue of speed more than anything. Let's see. So this is another article schema recommendation question. Assad Khan asks, he says, one of the recent confusions that have arrived with the launch of AMP project is that it's been included as part of the article schema recommendations. And there's a link to developers.google.com piece on rich snippets there. And he says, do we have any plans to auto-convert normal HTML pages and indexes as AMP HTML pages on the provided article schema? Or is the article schema recommendation only for AMP HTML pages? If the latter, please correct the documentation and clarify it in the structured data testing tool.
So I will have a look at the documentation to see what we can clarify. So we recommend this metadata everywhere for all the pages, not only AMP HTML. We won't convert your HTML page to AMP HTML. It makes no sense. You should be responsible of doing that with your own styling, your own way of doing things. Because maybe displaying on the mobile devices will be different than your page that you're going to show to a desktop, right? We can't do this automatically. In terms of metadata, it's not mandatory, but it's best to have. It's giving more information about, and more websites actually are requiring to have those extra metadata, like what image, if you're sharing this page, what image is going to be displayed, what should be the title, what should be the author, and so on and so on. So it's not mandatory again, but it's always better to have it.
That's great. Vincent Velma has a second question too. He says, besides analytics scripts, and again, this might be something we cover in a lot more detail during the analytics section, he says, what about remarketing pixels, for instance, Facebook ads pixels and things like that, those types of trackers?
That's a very good question. I think it's something that is very important to have. To be honest, I don't have the answer, but I will have a look and go back to him. But I'm sure it's easy to find the information on the GitHub. So I will have a look myself and answer the question later on and follow up.
That's great. Let me just take a quick circle through here make sure we don't have any other questions. That seems to be it for the major questions so far. Stacey, you have anything you want to add or jump in on there for a minute?
I do have a question, since it sounds like there was a little bit of clarity requested on the redirect. So once a publisher has decided that there is this AMP page and there's other related links, say, at the bottom of the story, and the publisher wants users to click out to those related links, and they do have both versions. They have their canonical website page, but also an AMP page. How does the publisher signal to Google or possibly Twitter and Pinterest, who are also going to be serving AMP HTML files, which one is the AMP file and which one is the canonical website page?
Well, it depends on the link itself. So if you putting a link of an AMP page, the user will see the AMP page. If you provide the link of the canonical page, the user will see the canonical page. So it's really important for the developer to make sure that they're giving the proper link depending to the person that is currently looking at the page. But there is nothing done right now on the cache or by AMP to redirect the user to one or the other. So that's the responsibility of the content owner, basically.
Okay, so what can the content owner do to signal, like, I want the AMP page to be surfaced?
So is it on the link of the AMP page?
Like in the back end, like in the HTML code. Is there like a line of code that they have to put to signal that they want to serve the AMP page?
It's a standard link. So just link to the AMP page and it's gonna work. There's nothing new in here.
Great, thanks.
Okay, great. I've got one repeat question from Ben Trance, which we did cover last time in the first office hours, but just to make sure that we're revisiting here. It's a simple question. He says, how does AMP do with material design? And is it compatible with material design?
It's a good question. So first, the AMP page we're gonna respond is responsive, so it's gonna be automatically fitting with the different type of devices. Then the canonical, the material design is also the way you're gonna present it to your users, right? So you're free to modify and to do it in this material way. So it's compatible definitely, but it's not. We're not giving a template. Do it by default.
That's great. Another question from Jeannie Hill, and Jeannie, I sure hope I'm pronouncing your name right. She says, how creative can we be with structured data for niche industries? So like today there's a painter but not a PPC manager. Sometimes my results are error-free in the Google Developer Test Toolkit, yet the structured data is not acknowledged in the Search Console.
That's a very specific question, so I'll be more than interested to get the exact details, so the code behind, so I can check. Normally, if it's supported by schema.org, it should work. But please come back to me, add more details with your code, and we'll look into it.
That's great. Thanks, Jeannie. One last question. This is another one actually about, where did that one go? That's great. We got people jumping in asking questions here. Another one from Sydney Demores. What is the pay? Okay, he says, what was the paywall metered or not feature extensively tested? Will AMP adhere to 7 different scenarios, for instance? Is it guaranteed? He says.
Well, we'll have a session talking about paywall. There is a full documentation available on GitHub. The implementation is still in progress, so stay tuned for this one. Follow the next coming talks, and you probably will be able to have answers to your questions.
Yes, we'll definitely have answers for those questions. And please keep those questions coming. Pierre Farr just dialed in. He's got a question. He says, which policies govern which AMP content is eligible for the carousel feature in Google SERPs, or search results? For those who don't know what SERPs are, is it just news-like content like Google News, or is it any content that can be served as AMP? And this is kind of tied to the question that we were talking about earlier as far as like iframes and things like that, but just to reiterate.
So it's a very good question. So for the moment, we'll first put news article in this carousel, in the search carousel. So maybe it's going to evolve in the future, but for the moment, it's only news articles that you define in metadata, and that's why we're asking to have those metadata to know that this is a news article. That will be included at that time for the search carousel that we talked about.
Right. Currently, we're targeting leaf nodes, as we're calling it, or article pages for AMP HTML, because for us it just makes sense. We're looking at articles that require a lot of speed, that users can consume in many pages in one sitting, actually. But in the long term, we definitely want all types of sites, whether it's travel sites, retail sites, to use AMP pages, because the ultimate end goal is to have users being able to load faster pages. So we're targeting news publishers currently, but you can bet that AMP HTML file should extend to all websites on the mobile web.
That's great. Thanks, Stacy. Jeannie just dialed in, and I have been pronouncing your name right. Thank you, Jeannie, for confirming that. She's got a question. She says, Emeric, how does she send you her code so that if she's like has questions or she's having errors? We mentioned before the GitHub page and a few things like that. I probably aren't going to be emailing it directly to you, but like, what are the best resources to direct her towards?
I think she has a very, very interesting question and towards being answered and open to anyone. So the best is just to go on Stack Overflow, pose the question on Stack Overflow, so anyone will be able to enjoy the answer as well.
Yeah, that's right. And also with all the questions that are coming in, and we really do appreciate them, when we get really, really specific, where it's like my specific website is doing this specific thing, or if I have a very specific use case, as Emeric said, the more people can get answered or get eyes on those questions and both see the answers to those and then also chime in on those, the more strong the entire community would be. So we definitely encourage you to add your questions to those resources that Emeric is mentioning there. Let's see. Got that one there. This is a follow-up actually about that carousel bit. To get into the carousel, do you require both AMP and structured data markup? I think this was actually from Jeannie as well. She said she uses the news article for many clients, but some are not HTTPS yet. So is that just because it's not an AMP file?
So we will serve AMP through HTTPS. There is no requirement, as far as I know, to host it on HTTP. So you can host your AMP version of the page on HTTP, but the cache version we'll serve will be on HTTPS. We require to have the metadata, so the markup on the page, to be in the search carousel and to be a news article for the moment. So both are required. So AMP version for sure, and in the AMP version specifying that this is a news article.
That's great. And PRFAR has a question. He says, thanks for answering, and also how do we handle paginated AMP content? So Google indexing supports rel equals next and rel equals prev annotations.
It's a good question. I think for the moment there is no direct support in AMP to do that, but you can just do on your own in your page. But go in GitHub and open an issue.
That's great. Let's see. We've got a couple other ones in here. Jacob Yagomba. He says he has a website. You give the URL. He says, we have done most of the things that Google recommended, but we are not been ranking well on Google compared to our competitors. Any advice? And this is a question we get in various different variations quite regularly. I'm not performing well in search. How do I perform better in search? And from my end of things, because I work with journalists, I do a lot of outreach and education around Google tools and around just specifically how to better use those tools. My answer is always write really great content that people want to share and that people want to link to. But beyond that, are there any resources that people can turn to for more information? I often recommend the Webmaster Tools as the best source to find out answers around things like SEO and performance and whatnot. We get into a little bit of a scenario where we can't really favor one site or the other and really kind of dig deep into those types of questions. But do you have any recommendations for Jacob there?
So the goal of AMP is make the page faster, and the speed of the page is one of the criteria to improve your ranking. But as you said, there is no custom help on how to do better. The Webmasters Forum are great. They also have sessions live, so you can ask questions about it. So I would suggest, as you said, to go there and have a look at all those tips. But again, content is the best. If you're creating great content, your user will come back. And if they like it, they will share it, and so on, so on. So you will be better for you.
That's great. That looks like it's it for now for questions. We have about 9 or 10 more minutes left in the Hangout here. Stacy or anybody else have a few comments that you wanted to follow up on for Emeric while we have them?
Nothing immediate comes to mind, Emeric. Thanks so much for the technical deep dive. I think Richard really provided the great overview and vision of why we're doing AMP, and you've really drilled down into some technical details. Just want to re-highlight, maybe Emeric, do you want to pull up that page of all the resources so people watching can just see the links again? Nick, I'm sure you'll add it to the G+ page as well, but
I sure
it's
will.
always nice to visually see all of them with the nice colors and links too.
Yes,
Oh, there's my face.
yes, yes, indeed. Yeah, we will be linking we'll be sharing all of the links to this presentation that was mentioned in this presentation in the comment section on the YouTube video and as well as on the Google Plus event page. So feel free to check those resources out.
Yeah, and one thing I learned about Stack Overflow, because I wasn't super familiar with that site, was they even have a page on the site to show you how to ask the ideal question on Stack Overflow to get your question answered as quickly as possible. There's like a certain format that is ideal, so we can include that.
Yeah, and actually we got another question from Vincent Velma. Vincent, thanks again for another good one. This is again another bit of an SEO question, but maybe it doesn't get too far into the territory that we can't talk about. He says from an SEO perspective, the AMP carousel is attractive to get traffic from. Will this carousel exclusively show AMP pages, or will it have a threshold for page speed loading time, which would mean the carousel would also show hand-tuned fast loading sites, for example?
As far as I know, it's going to be only AMP pages. We want the carousel to be fast. We want it to prefetch the elements for the users to have a great experience, smooth experience. So we want to have all the pages validated, and that's why AMP. So that's speed great. Is not the requirement. AMP is the requirement for that.
Very cool. And I got one more here. Let's see. Oh, no, that one was an answer to somebody else. Was giving it to somebody else's question. See, this is great. The community is already stepping in and helping. Just kind of sifting through here to make sure I didn't miss anybody. It looks like that's it for now. With the few minutes that we have left, again, I just wanted to reiterate we'll be doing ongoing office hours specifically on AMP for the next several weeks. If anybody has questions, the next upcoming one is on 129, which is next Friday. Paul Backus, developer advocate, and Malta Ubel, lead AMP engineer, will be joining us. So we'll be going even deeper into AMP as far as technical details go. So please keep those questions coming. In subsequent weeks, we're going to be going over additional topics like ads and revenue, analytics, which is a big topic of questions today. So we'll forward those questions over to the analytics session. Re-answer those for everyone. We'll talk a little bit about format innovation and then also paywalls. So that's the lineup for the next several weeks. If there's additional questions that people have or if you have ideas for additional office hours, definitely let us know. We're very much here to serve the community and make sure that people get the answers that they need. If you have additional questions or comments after the Hangout, definitely add those into the comment section on the YouTube page or the Google Plus event page. We will be collecting those and following up on those next week. Let's see if we have any other questions here.
Right, just to reiterate, Nick, we are launching AMP in Google search as early as late February. So until then, we will be marching along with these office hours to make sure that you can have your valid AMP HTML files ready to surface in areas like the search carousel or other Google canvases, and also other companies that are not Google. We have many, many other technology company partners who are very excited to serve AMP HTML files as well because they want to make sure their users get the best, fastest experience possible.
That's great. Actually, right in under the wire, we got another question from Kirsten Reichart. Thanks, Kirsten, for jumping in. She says, besides the technical aspects, do I have to be eligible for Google News and apply for the program, or can I use AMP for a news blog that is not on Google News yet?
So you're lucky. There is no need to be whitelisted or so on. So just have AMP ready and you're eligible.
As someone who is working very closely with the Google News team, that is right. You can have AMP HTML files, and you do not need to be a site in Google News to show up in Google search. However, Google News has very similar plans to start serving AMP HTML files in our app as well. So I would highly recommend you to separately and additionally apply to Google News, because then your AMP HTML files could potentially show up in the Google News app. And web app, actually.
And Stacy, what are some good resources as far as like getting approved for Google News? I know that this is a question that comes up quite a bit. We have some tutorials on our own site, g.co/newslab, that talk specifically about Google News. And in fact, this is probably a good opportunity to mention that we will have AMP-based lessons as well. After this Hangout series is over and after the AMP project launches, there will obviously be a lot of FAQs that we're gathering from that. We're going to create a couple lessons specifically geared around AMP and how to implement that, why you should think about that, and where those resources are. But Stacey, what other resources are available for people that are interested specifically with Google News and making sure that they get authorized for that?
Absolutely. I don't mean to hijack the AMP conversation, but very quickly, everything can be found within the Google News Publisher Center. It's the one-stop shop to get all of your questions answered. The Publisher Center is news.google.com/publisher. And once you've proven ownership of a news site, you can click a giant Request Inclusion in Google News button, and that'll take you to a very brief application which also lists our guidelines for getting into Google News. So hopefully that was clear enough. But I'm available on various channels. Nick knows that I've done a similar Hangout on Air with the News Lab, so happy to talk about Google News in other forums as well.
That's right. And actually, that's a really good pitch or a promo for that office hour. If you go back a few weeks, about 9 weeks ago, I think, man, 9 weeks is that long ago. If you go back 9 weeks or so on our Google Plus page, you'll actually see a specific office hour on Google News and then also on our YouTube page as well. We had two other questions come in while we were talking there. We got one from Cassiano Moreira. Man, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. I actually got two questions from him. He says, mentioned earlier WordPress plugin. Do we know anything about a Drupal module as well?
So no, stay tuned for those ones. We know we want to have most of the major CMS ready for that, for the launch. But there is nothing shared for the moment, so stay tuned.
All right. And we got about 6 minutes left before the end of the Hangout here. For those of you who are watching, and it looks like there are quite a few of you still, make sure you jump in here with questions if you have them. It's a great opportunity to get some direct feedback from experts in the field. In the meantime, we'll maybe do a little tap dance here for a second while people gather their thoughts. Just wanted to, again, reiterate, and I'll just share all of the links to everything that we've been talking about in the comment or in the description of the event page, as well as on our YouTube page, in the comments of the YouTube video. But also just wanted to remind everybody, if you haven't already checked out our site, the News Lab has a very robust website which we are constantly adding content to. If you go to g.co/newslab, not only will you find information about the News Lab specifically, our initiatives including our tools training, which is a big part of what I work on, education and outreach, creating tutorials and training and lessons around all the various different products that Google has. That covers a wide range of topics, everything from research and engagement to distribution, tools like Google Search and Google Earth and Google Maps, and then, as I mentioned, also Google News, and we'll be working with AMP in the future installments of our lessons. We're always looking for input. These tools are for you, and many of them are actually free. So we're hoping to get feedback from you on that site. If it's working, if it's not for you, we want to make sure that it is an education platform that is working for journalists. So definitely check us out at g.co/newslab. If anybody ever has any questions or needs to reach out to us, really easy ways to reach us. newslabsupport@google.com is one email alias. You can also reach out to us on Twitter at Google News Lab, and on our Google Plus page, which is Google News Lab as well. We got one, see, that worked. We got another question. This is great. Pierre Farr jumped in. He's got another one. He says, oh, and this is actually similar to a question that we answered last week, but just to reiterate it here, do the AMP URL and the canonical URL need to be on the same host name or domain name, or can they be on separate origins? Thank you, Pierre.
It's a very good question, and there is no requirement of having them in the same subdomain or same domain, so best for you.
Again, so it's personal preference kind of.
Yes.
Jeannie Hill, she asked again, she said, and Jeannie, thanks again, your questions have been fantastic today, but she says, one reason offered that our structured data pages are not in the knowledge graph carousel is too few structured data pages. What is the benchmark for sufficient amount of structured data for chances to show up, or is there a benchmark?
So have a look at the documentation. We are showing exactly like an example of what it should look like. I think it's going to be simpler for you to just have a look at that and compare it to your own schema.
That's great. And I think we have time for maybe one more question before we wrap up here. Let's see what we got. I think we got one more here down here at the bottom. Stand by, folks. There's a lot of scrolling going on here.
In the meanwhile, maybe if you didn't try a demo, you can go to g.co/mpdemo and test AMP and see how fast it is.
That's great. Hossein Moshanali has a question. He says about AMP, he says he's got a lot of errors in his new AMP. We have a lot of errors in the new AMP in the Search Console, but our AMP pages are working and they're past the validator test in Chrome. Is Google using a different validator, and what are the impact of these errors in the indexation of by Google and those who support AMP?
I would be interested to see what type of error he has to be able to validate them and to check compared to what he has on the console. So if you can go back to us with like a screenshot or more detailed information about that, would be great, and we will look into it. It's very specific, so I can't explain. Normally, it should be exactly the same way of validating the pages, so you should not have that. So maybe it's a bug or an issue. Come back to us, and we'll have a look.
Okay, and we got one final question by Vincent. Thanks, Vincent. He says, will AMP roll out internationally? In other words, will we see a carousel in the Netherlands too from February onwards?
So maybe I can let Stacy respond to this one.
Let's see. Launch timelines for specific countries. I would hate to misspeak, so I will look into the launch dates for other countries.
As far as I know, we're trying to launch internationally, so all the countries at the same time, but better recheck and come back.
Exactly. We are still trying to finalize our launch date for search here in the US too, so that's still a TBD, so internationally is also TBD, but Emeric and I will tag team that and get answers to you as soon as possible.
That's great. Well, thank you, Emeric, for answering all of these questions. We really appreciate the amount of detail you're able to go into with this, and I'm sure a lot of the people that were joining us today and asking questions were very happy with that as well. For those who are following along on Twitter and Google+, and adding in your questions, thank you so much for adding those. It really makes the Hangout more robust, and it does allow for a much better conversation. Again, next Friday, we'll be doing another AMP Hangout on Air. We'll be posting that on a Google Plus page with more information on timing and guests. For anyone else who has questions that we either didn't get to or didn't get a chance to ask them, feel free to drop those into the comment sections on the YouTube page or the Google Plus page, and we'll follow up on those. Emeric, Stacy, have yourselves a wonderful weekend, and everyone else, we'll see you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Emeric. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.